No one ever dared to step beyond the heavy iron gates of the Blackwell estate without permission. Those who did were never seen again, at least not in the same way. The mansion stood high on the hill, watching over the city like a silent king. Its windows darkened, its walls whispering of secrets no one dared to uncover. It was a place of power, fear, and unimaginable wealth. Inside lived the man everyone talked about, but few had truly seen. Damien Blackwell, the millionaire whose fortune was only matched by his mystery. Rumor had it he hadn't smiled in years, that after the accident, something inside him had died, along with his wife. The staff that worked there followed strict rules, their movements monitored, their words weighed, their presence tolerated only if invisible. They said the mansion itself could sense fear, and it fed on it. When Isabella arrived at the gates on that foggy morning, she had nothing but a small suitcase, a trembling heart, and a desperate hope that this job could save her family. Her mother was sick, her brother, still a child, needed medicine. And though the stories about Mr. Blackwell chilled her to the bone, desperation has a way of silencing fear. The guards at the gate looked at her with disbelief. "You really want to work there?" one asked, his tone both mocking and pitying. "I don't have a choice," she said quietly, gripping her worn leather bag as if it were armor. The gates opened with a mechanical groan, the sound of fate shifting gears. As she walked through, the air grew colder, heavier, as though the mansion itself was testing her courage. Every step toward the main doors felt like walking deeper into the unknown. Inside, everything gleamed with a cruel kind of perfection. Polished marble floors, chandeliers that glowed like captured stars, walls lined with portraits of ancestors who looked down with lifeless eyes. She was led to the head of staff, Mrs. Whitmore, a woman whose spine seemed carved from ice. "You'll keep to your quarters. You'll not speak unless spoken to, and you'll never, under any circumstance, enter the East Wing," she warned. "That is where Mr. Blackwell spends his time. Disturb him, and you're gone." Isabella nodded, but curiosity is a dangerous seed. It doesn't die easily, even when buried under fear. Her first days were uneventful but exhausting. She scrubbed, dusted, polished, always aware of invisible eyes watching her.
The other maids spoke in hushed tones, never looking directly at her, as though afraid her bravery or foolishness might be contagious. Then, one night, as a storm raged outside, she heard it, a sound that would change everything. It wasn't thunder, though it rolled through the halls like it. Something deeper, something human, pulled her toward it. She followed the echo down the dark corridor, her heart pounding so loud she feared it would betray her. The air grew colder with each step, the light dimmer, until she reached a massive door carved with symbols she didn't understand. Behind it, silence. She hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. What she saw made her breath catch. Damien Blackwell, once the untouchable millionaire, was on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass, blood streaking down his hand. His face, sharp and weary, turned toward her with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, voice rough as gravel. "I heard you," she whispered, her fear trembling in every word. "You needed help." No one ever spoke to him that way. No one ever dared. But Isabella wasn't like anyone else. She knelt beside him without hesitation, tearing a strip of cloth from her apron to stop the bleeding. His eyes locked on hers, cold and guarded, but beneath that glacial surface, something flickered, a memory, a warmth he thought had died long ago. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, though his voice had softened. "Maybe," she said, pressing the cloth against his wound. "But maybe you shouldn't be alone." For the first time in years, Damien didn't have a reply. The storm outside howled louder, lightning illuminating the fractured reflection of a man who had everything and nothing at once, and a woman who had nothing but dared to care anyway. From that moment, the mansion changed. The whispers grew louder, the air heavier. Staff began to vanish. And yet, amidst the chaos, something impossible began to bloom, a fragile, forbidden connection between the broken man who had locked the world away and the woman who had dared to open his door. What Isabella didn't know was that saving him would mean facing something far darker than loneliness.
Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And inside the heart of the mansion, something was waiting. Something that had been watching her since the moment she arrived. That night marked a shift inside the Blackwell mansion. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. The corridors no longer felt entirely empty. The silence now carried an unfamiliar rhythm, like the slow beating of a heart that had been dormant for too long. Isabella felt it, in the way the air moved, in the way the shadows seemed to follow her, curious, alive. She woke before dawn the next morning, unable to shake the image of Damien's wounded hand, the depth in his eyes, an abyss she hadn't meant to fall into. Her mind replayed every second of that forbidden encounter, her heart battling reason with every thought. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to see him. And yet something in her refused to regret it. When she went down to the kitchen, the other maids stopped talking. Their glances were quick, uneasy. The youngest one, Clara, leaned in close and whispered, "You went into the East Wing, didn't you?" Isabella froze. "Don't lie. The walls here talk." "I was only trying to help," Isabella said softly. Clara's expression turned fearful. No one helps him. People who try disappear. But Isabella didn't respond. Deep inside, she knew she had already crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Later that day, while polishing the grand staircase, she heard footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate. She turned and saw him standing there. Damien Blackwell, dressed in black, as if mourning something the world had long forgotten. His presence filled the space, quiet but commanding. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said, his voice even, his eyes unreadable. "I heard you were hurt," she replied, barely above a whisper. I couldn't ignore it." His jaw tightened. "You should have. The rules exist for a reason." For a moment, she thought he would dismiss her, have her escorted out by the guards, maybe even erased from the house like the others before her. But then his expression faltered, just slightly, and he said, "Come with me."
"Tell me, Isabella, why?" She hesitated. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." Something in her voice, something raw and unpolished, broke through his walls like sunlight slipping through cracked glass. For the first time, Damien looked not like a man of power, but like a man carrying an unbearable weight. He walked to the window, staring out at the rain-slicked garden below. "They think I'm cursed," he said quietly, "that anyone who gets close to me pays the price." "Maybe they're wrong," she said, her words trembling with courage she didn't know she had. "Or maybe you're just naive. She smiled faintly. Maybe, but sometimes that's what saves us. A silence fell between them, thick, electric, filled with the tension of two people who didn't know whether they were drawn together by destiny or danger. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. A low hum filled the air, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Damien's eyes darted upward. "Not again," he muttered. "What is it?" she asked. "Stay here," he ordered, but she didn't. As he rushed down the corridor, Isabella followed at a distance. The mansion seemed to twist and breathe, the walls groaning as if alive. She turned a corner and froze. The east wing door, the one she had entered the night before, was wide open, and inside the air shimmered with cold. She could hear voices, soft, distant, like whispers carried through water. She stepped closer, her breath fogging in the air. Inside, Damien was standing before a portrait of his late wife, his hand trembling as he reached toward it. The whispers grew louder, and for a moment she swore she saw movement in the painting's reflection, something dark, almost human. "Damien," she said, carefully. He turned sharply, his face pale. "I told you to stay away." "There's something here," she insisted, "something watching us." His expression darkened. "You don't understand. This house, it's not just a home, it's a cage. And whatever's inside it, it doesn't want to let me go." Before she could reply, the lights went out completely. In the pitch-black silence, she felt a rush of cold air behind her, followed by a whisper. Not Damien's, not anyone's, but something else entirely. A woman's voice, distant and haunting. "Leave, before it's too late." The temperature dropped, and Isabella's breath came out in white clouds. She reached for Damien's hand without thinking, her fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away.
Every creak of the mansion felt like a whisper meant only for her. Around midnight, she heard footsteps again, soft, hesitant, stopping right outside her door. She opened it slowly. Damien stood there, his face shadowed, his eyes unreadable. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "This house, it plays tricks." She hesitated. "Or maybe it remembers." He smiled faintly, a sad, broken smile. "You believe that too?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until she could feel his breath. "Then believe this," he said softly. "You should have left when you had the chance." But she didn't move. Her fear was real, but so was something else, a pull she couldn't explain. And then, from somewhere deep in the mansion, the piano began to play. Slow, haunting, deliberate. The melody filled the air, rich and sorrowful, the same song Isabella had heard faintly on her first night there. Damien turned pale. "That song," he whispered. "She used to play it." "Your wife?" Isabella asked. He nodded. "The night she died." The melody grew louder, as if whoever or whatever was playing wanted to be heard. Damien and Isabella followed the sound down the long corridor, past the grand staircase, until they reached the ballroom. The massive chandelier above swayed slightly, though there was no wind. The piano stood in the center of the room, its keys moving on their own. The song stopped abruptly as they stepped inside. Then, silence. Damien walked forward slowly. "Enough!" he shouted into the emptiness. "Haven't you taken enough from me?" The chandelier rattled violently, glass raining down, narrowly missing them both.
Isabella screamed, covering her head. When she looked up, Damien was on his knees, trembling, his hands clenched in fury and grief. "Damien," she cried, rushing to him, "you have to tell me what's happening." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time. "You wouldn't believe me," he said hoarsely. "No one ever does. Try me." He hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely audible. "My wife didn't die by accident, and she's not gone." The words hung in the air like poison. Isabella's skin went cold. "What do you mean?" she asked. He stood, his eyes glinting with both fear and defiance. "She's here, Isabella. She never left this house." A chill ran down her spine. You mean she won't let me go, not even in death."
The walls groaned, as if reacting to his confession. Somewhere above them, a door slammed on its own. The air thickened. The candles flickered. Isabella grabbed Damien's hand, feeling the tremor in his pulse. And then, as if to prove his words true, a voice whispered, low, mournful, but unmistakably human. "Damien, you promised me forever." Isabella turned toward the sound, her heart hammering. A figure stood at the edge of the ballroom, faint, translucent, but real enough to make her knees weaken. The face was pale, beautiful, and filled with sorrow. Damien's wife. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. "Evelyn." The ghost's eyes flicked to Isabella. "She shouldn't be here." The lights went out. When they came back on, the piano was burning, and Isabella realized she wasn't just trapped in a mansion haunted by love. She was trapped in the aftermath of a promise that had defied death itself. The mansion had grown quieter over the days that followed the gala, yet beneath that silence, something was shifting, brewing like a hidden storm, waiting for the right moment to break free. The millionaire, once so sure of his control, his perfection, his detachment from the world, began to feel something he hadn't known in years. Confusion, mixed with longing. His mornings felt empty without her voice echoing softly through the halls, without her presence in the kitchen, humming to herself as the first rays of sun filtered through the grand windows. He tried to distract himself with business meetings, with endless numbers and reports, but his mind kept drifting back to her, to the woman who dared to speak when others bowed, who looked him in the eye without trembling. Every time he passed by the east wing, where her quarters had been, a strange ache rippled through his chest. The space felt colder now, as if the walls themselves mourned her absence. Meanwhile, in the modest apartment she had found across town, the maid, now no longer a maid, but a woman reborn through hardship, stared at the city lights each night with a heart full of conflict. She had left because she thought it was the right thing to do, because she couldn't allow herself to fall in love with a man who belonged to another world. But as she folded her meager sheets and cooked her simple meals, her mind would betray her, replaying every stolen glance, every rare smile he had given her, every moment when their eyes had met
and the world had fallen away. And then came the letter.
Delivered by hand, sealed with the same golden insignia that once adorned his household stationery. Her hands trembled as she opened it, afraid of what it might say. The message was short, but each word burned through her heart. I was wrong. About everything. I need to see you. She didn't know whether to cry or to smile. For hours she sat staring at those words, unable to move, her mind a whirl of fear and longing. Was this real? Could he truly mean it? What could possibly drive a man like him, powerful, proud, seemingly untouchable, to reach out to her, a woman he once considered invisible? When she finally returned to the mansion, the rain had started to fall. Not a storm, but a soft, forgiving drizzle that seemed to cleanse the air. She hesitated at the gate, her heart racing as she saw the familiar lights glowing through the tall windows. The butler, surprised but not unkind, opened the door for her with a knowing look. "He's in the study," he said quietly. She stepped inside, every sound amplified. The soft crackle of the fire, the steady ticking of the clock, the sound of her heartbeat thundering in her ears. He was standing by the window when she entered, staring into the night as though searching for something just beyond reach. When he turned, she saw it immediately. The exhaustion in his eyes, but also the softness that hadn't been there before. The mask of arrogance had cracked, revealing the man underneath, flawed, lonely, and achingly human. He said, "I didn't think you'd come," his voice barely above a whisper. "I almost didn't. I didn't know if I should." He took a step forward, his movements slow, deliberate. "You've changed everything," he said, almost in disbelief. "You made me see myself for what I've become. A man who built walls so high he forgot what it felt like to live. And you..." Oh, he paused, his voice breaking. "You tore them down." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I never meant to. I just wanted to do my job." He smiled faintly, that rare smile that once made her heart stop. "And in doing it, you did the impossible. You made me feel again." Silence settled between them. Not the cold, empty kind, but the heavy, electric stillness that comes when hearts speak without words. He took another step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the smoke from the fireplace.
His hand lifted slightly, hesitated, then fell. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said softly. "But I can't let you walk away again without knowing that I..." "Don't," she interrupted, shaking her head, her voice trembling. "Don't say it unless you mean it, because I've already lost too much believing in things that weren't real." He looked at her for a long moment, the truth naked in his eyes. "It's real. You're real. And that terrifies me." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the door, her hand on the handle, every muscle in her body screaming to run. But her heart, her heart wanted to stay. Before she could move, his voice broke through the quiet, raw and desperate. "Please, stay." The word hung in the air, trembling like a secret neither of them were ready to face. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze once more. There was no command in his tone, no pride, only a man stripped bare by his own emotions, asking not as a master, but as a soul reaching out for another. Her eyes filled with tears again, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw him not as the millionaire who ruled everything he touched, but as a man who had finally found something, someone, worth losing everything for. Outside, the rain grew heavier,
tapping against the glass like 1,000 whispered promises. Inside, two hearts beat in uncertain rhythm, their next words teetering on the edge of forever. Neither of them spoke again that night, but sometimes silence says more than 1,000 words, and in that silence a new story began, one neither of them could have ever imagined. The following days were a blur of whispered conversations, stolen glances, and unspoken tension that hung over the Blackwell mansion like a storm cloud threatening to break at any moment. Isabella moved through the halls with a newfound confidence, no longer the timid maid that had arrived weeks before. Each step she took seemed to leave a subtle mark on the mansion itself, as though her presence was bending the shadows, softening the edges of its cold, ancient walls. She noticed the small changes almost immediately, the way the chandeliers flickered less, the air felt warmer, the oppressive silence no longer suffocating. Damien, on the other hand, struggled visibly with the changes she brought. He was used to solitude, to control, to living behind the walls of a mansion that reflected only power and fear.
Yet now, every time Isabella was near, something unexplainable stirred inside him. He found himself lingering by doorways, listening for her laughter, watching her from the shadowed corners of rooms, waiting for a moment when she wasn't aware he was there. It was both intoxicating and terrifying, a vulnerability he had not allowed himself in years. One evening, a heavy storm descended upon the estate. Lightning slashed the sky, illuminating the sprawling gardens in fleeting, ghostly flashes. Isabella was alone in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal, when she heard the unmistakable sound of glass breaking upstairs. Her heart leapt into her throat. Without thinking, she grabbed a candle and rushed toward the source of the noise, fear and adrenaline driving her forward. She found Damien in the library, surrounded by shattered porcelain from a vase that had toppled during the storm. His usually composed expression was replaced by a rare look of frustration and vulnerability. He looked up at her arrival, startled, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and annoyance. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, trembling slightly. "I could say the same to you," Isabella replied, setting the candle on the table. "Why are you out here in the middle of a storm when you know it's dangerous?" Damien closed his eyes, running a hand through his hair. "Because the silence was killing me. Because being alone in this house, surrounded by shadows and memories, it feels like drowning." Isabella stepped closer, holding her hand out as if to reach across the invisible distance between them. "Then don't drown alone," she said softly. "I'm here." For a moment, Damien didn't respond. He simply stared at her, the intensity of his gaze sending a shiver down her spine. Then, slowly, he allowed himself to sit down, exhausted, letting the weight of his emotions show for the first time. Isabella remained standing, her presence a quiet, steady reassurance in the storm's chaos. As the night wore on, they shared fragments of their pasts, careful, guarded confessions that neither had shared with anyone else. Isabella spoke of her family, the sacrifices she had made, the fears that had driven her to take this job despite the danger. Damien spoke of his late wife, of the tragedy that had consumed him, of the isolation that had become his world.
And in the sharing of these intimate truths, an invisible bridge began to form between them, a fragile, unbreakable connection that neither could ignore. Days turned into weeks, and Isabella's influence on the mansion grew stronger. She discovered secret passages, hidden letters and journals long forgotten, revealing the depths of Damien's past and the dark legacy that had haunted his family for generations. Every discovery brought them closer, the thrill of secret shared, forging a bond that was impossible to deny. Damien began to rely on her, not just as a caretaker or helper, but as a confidant, the one person who had seen him as he truly was and had chosen to stay. Their nights together became moments of quiet rebellion against the mansion's oppressive energy. They would sit by the fireplace, sharing stories, touching lightly, learning the contours of each other's presence without words. Every accidental brush of hands, every lingering gaze carried a tension that neither could resist. The air between them was electric, charged with emotion and desire, yet tempered by the mutual understanding that the mansion and its dark secrets were still watching. Then came the night of the storm, unlike any other. Rain lashed against the windows with the force of 1,000 fists, and the wind howled as if trying to tear the mansion apart. Isabella was in the nursery with Damien's child, rocking him to sleep, when she heard a noise that froze her blood. A low, sorrowful wail emanating from the east wing, where the ghost of Damien's wife was said to linger. Without hesitation, she grabbed Damien's hand and led him toward the source, heart pounding, every sense alert. The shadows seemed to twist and move around them, the air heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. And then, at the end of the corridor, they saw her, a figure, pale and shimmering, ethereal, watching them with a mix of sorrow and rage. Damien's eyes widened. "Evelyn!" he whispered, voice breaking, the past and present colliding in a single moment. The ghost raised a hand, as if commanding them to stay away. "This is my house, and no one shall claim what was mine." Isabella stepped forward, shielding Damien's child, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "She may have been yours, but she's not him. You are still here. You are still alive, and we are not afraid." The ghost's gaze flickered, conflicted.
The air thickened, the chandeliers swayed, and a chill ran through the room. Damien stepped beside Isabella, his hand brushing hers in silent solidarity. For the first time, he faced the presence that had haunted his life with someone he trusted completely. Hours passed as the storm raged, but slowly the ghost receded, fading into the shadows from which she had emerged. Damien let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, turning toward Isabella with a mixture of gratitude, awe, and something deeper, something forbidden, yet undeniable. They returned to the nursery, exhausted but victorious. For the first time in weeks, the mansion felt less like a prison and more like a home, a fragile, flickering warmth returning to its halls. Isabella held Damien's child close, feeling the soft rhythm of his heartbeat, while Damien stood beside her, watching with a rare, open vulnerability. And in that quiet, after the storm, they both knew something fundamental had changed. Their bond, forged in danger, secrecy, and the shadow of death, had become unbreakable. The mansion's ghosts, the weight of the past, and the vast chasm of their worlds could not undo what they had found in each other: courage, trust, and the spark of something that neither had dared to hope for. But even in that fragile peace, they understood one truth. The Blackwell mansion had many more secrets, and each one promised to test their resolve, their hearts, and the impossible bond they had formed. The days following the storm marked a new era in the Blackwell mansion. Isabella moved through the halls with a sense of purpose, no longer the timid maid who had first arrived, her presence commanding attention without a single word. She understood the pulse of the house now, the whispers in the walls, the subtle creak of floorboards that seemed to speak secrets only she could interpret, the faintest flicker of shadows that seemed almost alive. Every room she entered became her domain, not by authority, but by sheer force of will, and the mansion itself seemed to recognize it. Damien, meanwhile, was undergoing a transformation of his own. The powerful, untouchable man who had lived in cold isolation for years found himself drawn to Isabella in ways he could not explain. He watched her from across vast, empty corridors, lingered near her as she moved from task to task, and found himself listening for the soft cadence of her voice, which had begun to echo in his mind even when she was not present.
There was a magnetic pull, a gravitational force between them, invisible yet undeniable, and every glance they shared carried the weight of unspoken words, hidden desires, and dangerous possibilities. One night, as lightning once again carved the sky in jagged white lines, the mansion seemed to awaken. The shadows twisted unnaturally, the air thickened, and the temperature dropped, sending shivers down both their spines. Isabella was in the library, sorting through a stack of journals and letters she had found hidden behind the shelves. The documents revealed secrets about Damien's family, ancient rivalries, tragic accidents, and a legacy steeped in both wealth and misfortune. Every word she read, every revelation, drew her closer to understanding the man she had come to care for. But it also highlighted the danger that loomed over them both. Damien appeared at the doorway, his expression unreadable, the storm casting his silhouette in stark relief. "You shouldn't be reading those," he said, voice low but firm. "I have to," Isabella replied. "If we are to survive here, if we are to understand this house, I need to know what's real and what's lies." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. "There are things in this house that are not meant to be understood, things that can break even the strongest mind." She looked up at him, her eyes unwavering. "Then we face them together. I'm not afraid." For a long moment, Damien stared at her, searching for any hint of deceit or weakness. Finding none, he finally nodded, a silent acknowledgement of trust, a bond forming stronger than any fear. That night, they ventured deeper into the East Wing, the part of the mansion Damien had always avoided. The walls were lined with portraits, each staring at them with eyes that seemed almost alive. Dust motes floated in the pale moonlight, filtering through the tall windows, and the air smelled faintly of old roses and candle wax. As they walked, the shadows shifted unnaturally, and faint whispers seemed to echo through the corridors, growing louder as they approached the grand ballroom. Inside, the ghost of Evelyn appeared once again. Her form was pale, shimmering and ethereal, but her presence carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken threats. Her eyes fixed on Damien, sorrow and rage mingling in a gaze that could pierce stone. "You promised me forever," she said, her voice both mournful and commanding.
Isabella stepped forward, placing herself subtly between Damien and the apparition. "She may have been yours," she said firmly, "but she's not him. He is alive. He is still here, and we are not afraid." The ghost's gaze shifted to Isabella, studying her as if trying to discern whether she was a threat or a savior. The temperature in the room dropped further, frost forming on the edges of the windows. The chandeliers swayed violently, casting shifting shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. Damien's hand brushed Isabella's instinctively, a silent acknowledgement of trust, unity, and mutual courage. Hours passed in a tense standoff, the ghost testing their resolve, probing the bond that had formed between the two of them. Isabella felt every emotion acutely: fear, adrenaline, but also a profound determination that surpassed self-preservation.
Damien, equally strained, displayed a side of himself he had hidden for years: vulnerability, humanity, and the desperate need to protect those he cared for. Finally, the apparition began to recede, fading into the shadows with a final glance that promised both lingering influence and future challenges. Damien let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and Isabella exhaled as well, her heart pounding in rhythm with the mansion's eerie pulse. The storm outside subsided, leaving only the sound of rain gently tapping against the windows. For the first time in weeks, the mansion felt lighter, less oppressive, almost alive in a way that suggested cautious approval. Damien turned to Isabella, his eyes soft but intense. "You saved more than me tonight," he said, voice husky with emotion. "You've changed this place. And me." Isabella looked at him, her own emotions raw and unguarded. "We changed each other, and we'll keep changing it, together." Days turned into weeks, and a fragile routine formed. Isabella and Damien navigated the mansion with newfound confidence, their bond deepening with each shared secret, each near brush with danger, and each quiet moment stolen in the shadows. The mansion itself seemed to respond to them, the oppressive weight of its history lifting slightly, though never fully gone. Yet beneath the surface, the dangers remained. Hidden passages, long-forgotten curses, and the lingering presence of Evelyn's spirit reminded them that the mansion's past was far from resolved.
Every day brought new mysteries, new tests of courage, and new opportunities for their bond to grow stronger or break under pressure. Through it all, Isabella discovered a side of herself she had never known: brave, resourceful, and fiercely loyal. Damien, in turn, allowed himself to feel again, to hope, and to embrace a love he had thought impossible. Their connection was forged in fear and darkness, tempered by courage and trust, and illuminated by moments of tenderness and understanding that neither had expected to find in the shadowed halls of the Blackwell mansion. Even as the days grew darker and the secrets of the estate more ominous, one truth remained unshakable. Together, they could face anything. Together, they could confront ghosts, unravel mysteries, and challenge the very fabric of the house that had ruled their lives. And in the depths of that shared resolve, a love blossomed, unpredictable, dangerous, yet unstoppable. The mansion's whispers faded into a quieter hum. Shadows softened around the edges, and Isabella realized that the impossible had already been achieved. She had survived, she had saved a man, and she had awakened something in both the house and Damien that no one else ever dared to attempt. The mansion had settled into an uneasy calm, but Isabella knew better to trust appearances. Every corner, every hallway, every echo of footsteps carried a reminder that the house was alive, that it watched, that it remembered. Damien moved beside her, silent and tense, as they explored the northern wing, a part of the estate Damien had long forbidden anyone to enter. Here, the air felt thick with anticipation, heavy with the scent of old wood and secrets long buried. The walls were lined with paintings, each one more haunting than the last. Eyes seemed to follow them as they walked, portraits of ancestors and strangers alike, their expressions frozen in judgment, despair, or accusation. Isabella's pulse quickened with every step, but she did not falter. She had come too far, risked too much, and discovered too many truths to turn back now. Damien's hand brushed hers occasionally, light, almost accidental, yet each touch igniting a spark neither could ignore. The storm outside mirrored the tension within the mansion, lightning illuminating the hallways, thunder shaking the walls, wind rattling the windows.
And then the unmistakable sound returned. The piano playing, slow, deliberate, and mournful, echoing from deep within the east wing. "They never stop," Damien murmured, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the long corridor ahead. "No matter what we do, she watches, she waits." "Then we confront her," Isabella replied firmly, her hand finding his, gripping it. "We face it together." The closer they approached the east wing, the colder the air became. Isabella could see her breath, could feel the frost forming along the edges of the marble floors. Shadows twisted unnaturally, converging toward them as if the house itself were aware of their intrusion. The piano's melody grew louder, more insistent, filled with sorrow and rage. When they entered the grand ballroom, Evelyn appeared once more. Her form was more defined, more real than ever. Her eyes burned with a mix of love, jealousy, and wrath. "You cannot be here," she said, voice both ethereal and commanding. "He belongs to me." Isabella stepped forward, unwavering. "No, he belongs to himself, and he chooses life now. He chooses love." The ghost's form shimmered violently, the room freezing and thawing in sudden bursts. Candles exploded with sparks, and the chandeliers swung dangerously overhead. Damien moved instinctively in front of Isabella, shielding her. His hands trembled, his face pale, yet his eyes held something fierce, a determination she had never seen before. "You cannot control me," he shouted toward the apparition. "I will not live in fear any more. I will not be haunted into submission." The piano's melody faltered, then stuttered, as if reacting to his defiance. The shadows writhed across the walls, forming shapes that were both beautiful and terrifying. Evelyn's voice became a chorus of whispers, echoing through the room in a dissonant harmony. Isabella placed her hands on Damien's chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "Whisper together. We face it together." For the first time, Damien truly saw her, not as a maid, not as an intruder, but as a partner, a savior, a force of courage he could rely on. And in that recognition, something shifted. The house groaned, the shadows twisted, but the oppressive weight seemed to falter. Evelyn's form flickered, destabilized by the unity of their resolve. Her sorrow deepened, and a look of longing appeared in her eyes, not just wrath. "You cannot erase me," she whispered, voice trembling, almost human.
"We do not erase you," Damien replied, his voice steady, imbued with newfound strength. "But we will live, and we will not be bound by your grief or fear." The room shook violently, glass shattering from the chandeliers above, dust cascading like rain. Isabella held him closer, grounding him, anchoring both of them as the mansion seemed to fight back against their defiance. Then, as suddenly as the chaos began, silence fell. The piano's melody ceased. The shadows retreated to their corners. Evelyn's form slowly dissolved, leaving only a lingering, almost peaceful presence in the air. Damien sank to his knees, exhaustion overtaking him, while Isabella knelt beside him, hands on his shoulders. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it." "No," he replied, voice hoarse, yet filled with something neither fear nor grief could mask. "You did it. You were the courage this house needed. You saved me." Isabella smiled faintly,
brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "We saved each other," she said, and in that moment the storm outside seemed to break. Rain pattered gently against the windows, the wind softened, and the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion finally began to lift. For the first time in decades, the Blackwell mansion felt like a home rather than a prison. Shadows still lingered, and secrets were still buried in the walls, but the oppressive weight had been replaced by hope, a fragile, glowing hope that both terrified and exhilarated them. They remained together in the ballroom for hours, neither speaking, simply feeling the presence of life returning to the house. Damien's hand found Isabella's, their fingers entwining naturally, a silent promise forming between them that neither time nor ghosts could sever. And in the quiet aftermath, one truth was undeniable. The impossible had been achieved. A maid dared what no one else could, touching the heart of a man, confronting a ghost, and bending the will of a house steeped in fear and sorrow. The impossible had become real, and in its wake, love had found a way to flourish even in the darkest shadows. The days after the confrontation with Evelyn brought a fragile peace to the mansion, but Isabella knew better to believe that the darkness was gone entirely. The shadows had retreated, yes, but they still lingered in corners, in the creak of floorboards, in the whisper of the wind through the ancient windows.
Damien moved differently now, less guarded, more open, but there were moments when the weight of his past, the memory of his wife, and the legacy of the Blackwell name pressed down on him like an invisible hand. Isabella found herself drawn into the depths of his world, discovering corridors she had never seen, chambers sealed for decades, and journals chronicling secrets so dark that even Damien's confident exterior faltered when they were revealed. Each discovery brought danger, but also a sense of intimacy. They shared whispers in dim hallways, hands brushing over dust-laden books, eyes locking over the flicker of candlelight, as if daring the mansion itself to interfere. One night, she ventured into the West Wing, a part of the estate Damien rarely entered. The air was colder, the shadows longer. Portraits of ancestors with hollow eyes seemed to watch her every move. She paused in front of a large painting, one she had never seen before. It depicted a woman, beautiful, elegant, yet sorrowful, standing in a garden that looked eerily similar to the grounds outside the mansion. Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine, a connection she could not explain. Damien appeared silently behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "That's my great-grandmother. She had visions, saw things before they happened. People called her cursed. I think she understood more than anyone in this house ever has." Isabella turned to him, feeling the tension of shared history and mystery pressing against her chest. "Do you think it's still here, watching?" He shook his head slowly, but his eyes betrayed doubt. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel it in the air, like a presence that waits for the right moment to test us." Later that evening, the mansion seemed to come alive in subtle ways. The piano began to play softly on its own. The chandelier swayed despite the still air, and distant whispers threaded through the corridors like a hidden symphony. Damien and Isabella moved together through the house, following the sounds as if guided by some invisible hand. Each step brought them closer not just to the heart of the mansion, but to each other. Their touches lingered, their glances carried unspoken questions, and every shared breath felt like a promise neither dared to speak out loud. In the East Wing, they found a hidden door behind an old tapestry. The keyhole was ornate, and the lock seemed impossibly old.
Damien hesitated, then handed Isabella a small, ancient key he had found in one of the journals. Her hands trembled as she inserted it, unlocking the door with a soft click.
Inside was a chamber untouched by time. Dust covered the floor, and old furniture lay in disarray, but the air vibrated with a strange energy. At the center stood a pedestal, holding a single faded letter. Isabella picked it up carefully. The handwriting was elegant, the words addressed to Damien, warning him of dangers that lurked in the shadows of his family's legacy. This explains everything," Damien murmured, reading over her shoulder. "The warnings, the tragedies, it was all here, in black and white, and yet I ignored it." "Not anymore," Isabella said softly, placing a hand on his chest. "Now we face it together." As they stood there, the air grew colder, shadows stretching and curling toward them. Whispers became louder, forming words just beyond comprehension. The mansion was alive again, testing them, probing their courage, measuring the strength of their bond. Damien took Isabella's hand firmly in his. "No matter what comes, we survive this, together." She met his gaze, feeling the fire of determination in his eyes, a reflection of her own resolve. "Together," she echoed. And in that moment, the mansion seemed to pause, the shadows recoiling slightly, as if acknowledging that two hearts, united in trust, courage, and defiance, could stand against even the most ancient and relentless darkness. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of candlelight, and every whisper in the air reminded them that the Blackwell mansion was far from tamed. Secrets remained hidden, dangers lurked, and Evelyn's presence still lingered, watching and waiting. Yet Isabella and Damien had forged a bond strong enough to face what was to come, and in the stillness of that chamber they realized that love had become their greatest weapon and their greatest shield. The mansion had never felt so alive. It was as if every wall, every shadow, every whisper in the corridors acknowledged the transformation that had taken place. Isabella and Damien stood together in the grand ballroom, the flickering candlelight casting their elongated shadows across the ornate floor, their fingers intertwined, their hearts beating in unison. The oppressive weight of the Blackwell legacy had lifted, replaced by something far more powerful: hope, courage, and the undeniable force of love.
For years, Damien had lived in solitude, surrounded by wealth but trapped in an invisible prison of grief, regret, and fear. The death of his wife had created an unbridgeable chasm between him and the world, a barrier no one had dared to cross. Until Isabella arrived. She had walked into the mansion not merely as a maid, but as a force of change, challenging his isolation, confronting the shadows, and daring to touch the man behind the legend. And in doing so, she had performed the impossible.
Hand in hand, they moved through the corridors, confronting shadows that twisted unnaturally, confronting whispers that carried warnings and threats, confronting the remnants of Evelyn's presence that lingered with unresolved sorrow. The climax of their journey arrived in the grand ballroom once more. Evelyn appeared, her form more ethereal and terrifying than ever, yet tinged with sorrow. Her gaze fixed on Damien, but there was something new: understanding, recognition, perhaps even approval. "You have grown stronger," she whispered. "But the mansion, it remembers." Damien stepped forward, standing beside Isabella, his hand resting on hers, the connection between them radiating a force that the mansion could not ignore. "We remember too," he said, voice steady, imbued with power and emotion. "We remember courage, love, and the choice to live beyond fear. You cannot bind us anymore." Evelyn's form wavered, the shadows twisting and recoiling as though recognizing defeat. Yet she did not vanish with anger or resentment.
She faded with a final glance of acknowledgement, leaving behind the sense that while the past was never fully gone, the present and future now belonged to those brave enough to claim it. The mansion was finally still. The piano's ghostly notes were gone, the chandeliers hung peacefully, and the corridors echoed with a serene silence. Damien and Isabella remained in the ballroom, hearts still racing from the confrontation, their breaths mingling, their eyes locked. Words were unnecessary. The depth of their bond transcended speech. The impossible had been accomplished. A maid had dared, and she had prevailed, reshaping the life of a man, a legacy of a family, and the very soul of a mansion. They spent the following days reinforcing that peace, discovering hidden joys in the mansion's corners, tending to forgotten gardens, and restoring rooms once neglected. Every step they took was a declaration of their shared triumph over fear, grief, and the weight of history. Love flourished, fragile yet unstoppable, amid the gilded halls and shadowed corridors. Isabella became not just a companion, but the heart of the house, a force of resilience and courage that breathed life into every brick and beam. Damien, in turn, shed the walls he had built around himself over decades. He laughed more freely, spoke with openness, and allowed himself to feel fully again, emotions long suppressed now rising in intensity and color.
Their love was no longer secret, no longer tentative. It was a living, breathing entity within the mansion, powerful enough to alter its very essence. As they stood together in the moonlit ballroom one evening, Damien turned to Isabella, his eyes soft yet intense. "You changed everything," he said. "Not just me, not just this house, but everything I ever thought was unchangeable." Isabella smiled, her hand resting gently on his cheek. "And you changed me," she whispered. "You taught me to see courage in the shadows, to find hope where I never expected it, to believe in the impossible." They embraced then, holding each other tightly, feeling the pulse of the mansion beneath their feet, the wind whispering softly through the windows, and the remnants of the past finally at peace. Their love had not only survived the shadows, the secrets, and the ghostly trials, it had triumphed, brighter than any storm or curse. The Blackwell Mansion, once a place of fear and sorrow, had become a testament to resilience, courage, and love's unparalleled power. Isabella and Damien, bound together by their trials and triumphs, knew that whatever secrets remained, whatever shadows lingered, they would face them as one, together, unstoppable and unafraid. And as the candlelight flickered across the grand ballroom, Isabella turned toward the invisible audience of their story, a gentle smile on her lips, and whispered, "If you've been captivated by this journey, if the impossible inspired you, make sure to show it. Like, comment, and subscribe to join us for the next chapter of Lives That Defy Expectation."